Hello, my name is Juliana, blah, 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 blah. Can you hear me? Okay, yeah, no problem.
Meeting will now come to order. This meeting of the School Land Board is being held in person at 1700 North Congress Avenue, Stephen F. Austin Building. Access to this meeting by members of the public was published in advance in the Texas Register in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act. Any member of the public who wishes to address the School Land Board may do so during the public comment period. And will the board secretary please call the roll?
Chairwoman Buckingham,
Here.
Ms. Burke, Mr. Curley,
Here.
Mr. Neal, Mr. Burciaga.
Here.
All right, there being 3 present, we have a quorum. I now call this meeting to order. Pledge of Allegiance. If you'll please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the United States and then Texas. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. And I was speaking in Bastrop last night, and they gave a big yeehaw at the end of the Texas pledge, which is always fun. Felt like I was back in my Senate district. So, okay, so first item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the January 30th, 2024 School Land Board meeting. Members, any discussion or questions?
None.
Right, I hear a motion.
Motion to approve?
Second.
All right. Any objection to approving the minutes? I think since there are 3 of us, no. So the minutes are approved by unanimous consent. Next item, number 2, is the public comment period. Members of the public may address the School Land Board concerning any matter within the authority of the board. As chairwoman, I am limiting the length of time available to each speaker to 2 minutes, and the board secretary shall keep track of time. Do we have anyone in attendance who wishes to give public comment?
No.
Nope. Okay. We do not, so we'll move on to item number 3, approval of the consent agenda, which is before you. Members, are there any wishes to extract any item from the consent agenda to discuss or vote individually? Okay. And then we have a motion.
Motion to approve?
Okay.
I'll second.
All right, we're on a roll. Motion's made, seconded, and carries unanimously. There's no objection. Next item is item number 4, discussion on amending Title 31 Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 155, Subchapter A, Coastal Public Lands, Section 155.15, relating to rents and fees for commercial and industrial activities. And before I recognize Mr. Wells, you know, what this is, and I know he's going to explain it better, but we're just trying to figure out the right way to escalate rent payments for folks who have, say, piers on submerged land. Our current way was kind of a combination of, and he'll explain it better, but neighboring appraisals. So some people were seeing their rents go up significantly. The rent term is for 10 years. So we're just trying to figure out a fair process where, of course, we're generating money for the school children of Texas, but we're also being fair to our property owners who aren't all of a sudden seeing a 300% to 600% escalation in their rental fees, which would give me great heartburn should I be one of those people. So, which I am not. But so, Chair recognizes Mr. Wells to discuss item 4.
Good morning, David Wells with Asset Management. I believe Commissioner kind of summarized it, but just for the board's benefit, the leases we're talking about, there's an example here on 3D. These are leases that are along the coast that are commercial activity. These tend to be marinas, industrial projects, sometimes HOAs where they rent out the condos in South Padre Island, those kinds of projects. And what we've come across is we do these leases in 10-year terms. And so we got a lot of leases starting last year that were last done in 2013. And the way we calculate the rent on these is we do it on a per square foot flat rate basis, and then we do it on a land value basis. And as you all are probably aware, in the last 10 years, certain areas, land values have skyrocketed. And when we were doing these calculations, some of these rents were increasing 3 and 4 times. And we had some unhappy lessees about that. So we wanted to address that. And in the memo, you'll see we kind of provided some options on ways we can address this. I think the most prominent one we've discussed is putting a cap on those increases. What that would look like is for renewal of leases that have made minor or no changes, we would cap their increase at 50%. So if they were paying $1,000 in the next round, they would be capped at $1,500 rather than some exponential increase based on land value. The other option is we let these rates go into effect. The PSF earns the money off of these land value increases, and people are unhappy, but everyone's being treated the same based on CAD value appraisals. The other thing that we could do, this kind of came up previously, a little over 10 years ago, we did these leases in 5-year terms, and then we extended those to 10-year terms, which kind of created, it didn't create this problem, but it probably exacerbated it, because in 5-year terms, you don't see these huge swings in land value typically like you're seeing in these 10-year terms. So another option would be changing the lease terms so that they're renewed more often and these big increases don't appear. The other option we could do is address these on an individual basis as they come up. The number of leases we're talking about here tend to be relatively small. It's about 8% of our total leases. So on the entire coast, we have roughly at any given time 300 active commercial leases. And we're talking roughly 5 to 6 leases a year that this might impact. It's not a huge majority of the leases. These tend to be areas where land values are high, so South Padre Island, Port Aransas, Clear Lake, those kinds of areas of the coast. And money-wise, we look back to 2019 on the difference between using a land value and a flat rate, and it averaged about $200,000 per year that the PSF collected using the land value on some of these projects versus using a flat rate per square foot basis. So assuming we put a 50% cap on that, we're talking about roughly an average of $100,000 a year, which we expect that would increase. Should we implement a cap, we would expect roughly $200,000 a year from the PSF that we would otherwise collect. And I know this is a discussion, so don't let me dominate the conversation. Feel free. We wanted to get board feedback and some direction on what the board's thoughts were before we finalized our proposal and brought it back to you for approval.
Yeah, thank you. And it was sort of originally an action item, but I didn't really like what they had to put before us because it created people operating under 2 sets of rates, which I felt like was unfair. I also, when we do decide a policy, whatever that is, I do think because we had some of these owners this past year that had this massive rate increase, I would like to figure out a way to retroactively go back and put them on track for the 10 years that kind of what we decide. But because of being a thoughtful approach, it's happening slightly slower than I would like it to, but it's better to get it right than it is to do it fast. So I was just kind of interested in y'all's thoughts.
For discussion? I think question here is on the 5-year term. The problem is on a lessee is if they're making any kind of improvements to a property and they know they only have 5 years versus 10 years, and that's going to affect them, right?
Well, in the case of these leases, they're tied to the littoral owner. So in this case, it's the restaurant owner, for example, that has the dock off of the back of their restaurant. So as long as they own that restaurant, they'll be entitled to that lease. It's not a lease that can just be handed to somebody else in the case that they don't renew.
Cannot be, at the end of the term, they can't transfer to somebody else who's making the higher bid or anything.
No, so we lease it to whoever owns the land next to the submerged land, the high and dry land.
Okay.
So on the reason we switched from a 5-year term was basically the field office goes and does inspections on all of these properties every time, and there's, I don't know, if you include residential piers, it's in the thousands and thousands. And by the time it was just a constant cycle of inspection, and it was taking up a lot of their effort. So that's one reason we moved to 10-year terms. But it does come up if they do want to make changes in the middle of their term. We do amendments. Those are pretty common, and those come before the board on a regular basis.
I personally like the 10-year term and just kind of having a cap on how much it can go up. The other kind of thing to talk about that had been suggested is if they increase their dock by 100 linear feet, there's an arbitrary number there that then they went back to the regular rate, which I'm not a fan of either. You know, maybe if someone's gonna build on a whole bunch of their dock, then we can talk about that, but I still kind of like the idea of just having a, you know, everybody treated fairly and kind of the same.
Well, going back to your discussion that if you have the restaurant, then you own that land and that dock is there, right?
Yes.
So when you go to fair market value of the land, the question is that really the fair market value? Because you really can't lease it to somebody else that's going to use it, so it almost depreciates that piece of land, doesn't it? So, I mean, that's why,
That's a good point.
you know,
Right. I mean,
nobody else is going to take it, so it really is not fair market to other land, right? Because
Right.
access and all that, they can't have access.
right, that is correct. We used the county appraisal district values for the land values on the, and it's an imperfect source of information, but it's the best that we have.
Yeah, so that's why I agree with you with the.
Yeah, because it's, you know, if, especially if you look at people who have older homes that they've had a long time on the coast and they've had this dock forever, and then someone builds a really expensive property next to them.
Right.
And then all of a sudden they get this massive increase in their rent. You know, those are the people where I just really want to be sure we're being thoughtful and fair. And I think you bring up a good point. Any other thoughts?
I support the 10-year lease because I could see why that could create a lot of maybe unnecessary work or work that's not that much impactful by looking at them every 5 years. I like the status quo option, but I also can support the cap because of the concerns you mentioned about values going up too quickly.
Well, then we'll kind of, I just kind of wanted to get the temperature of the board and be sure I wasn't having an opinion difference. So we'll come back next meeting with something a little more hammered out, but just kind of wanted to get some direction. Any other thoughts or comments before we move on?
Again, my biggest problem I have is fair market value when, like I said, it's a restaurant that has, and it's really, their only access is through here. You know, so does it really have that value? I mean,
Right. I
nobody.
think that's a very valid point that I
Yeah.
hadn't actually thought of before,
Okay.
so. Okay, anything else? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll see this again. It'll be better, more cooked next time. Okay, next item on the agenda is item number 5, consideration and possible action on proposed amendments to 31 TAC Section 9.81 regarding the meeting schedule and related procedures for the committee that makes pooling and production sharing agreement application recommendations to the board. And the chair recognizes Ken Mills to present item number 5.
Good morning, Commissioner, board members. Ken Mills, Oil, Gas, and Energy Section, Office of General Counsel. This, as you know, the School Land Board is the entity that approves pooling applications or not. That's the consent agenda, largely. And there's a rule that addresses the procedure followed by the committee that makes recommendations to you, the pooling committee. There's a representative from the land office and a representative from the governor's office on that committee, and they hear the applications at a meeting and they make recommendations to you. The rule in the administrative code that describes this whole process has been around in its current form for probably at least 15 or 20 years. And over the course of that time, things have changed. And so this proposal is an effort to make the rule that's in the books reflect what is actually going on the pooling committee. And it addresses how often or frequently this board meets, which has kind of changed over time, but this proposed rule will give the rule more flexibility. We not only look, and I say we because I sit in on these meetings, it feels like we, not only look at pooling agreements, but also production sharing agreements. The lead time for an applicant to submit its application so that staff can review it and make recommendations, actually, we currently require 30 business days in order to get those in time for briefings and to make sure they're in your notebooks and all that. So the time in the rule has been expanded to reflect that actual schedule. There's no longer a representative of the Attorney General's office on this board, so the reference to the Attorney General's office is proposed to be deleted. And then finally, there's some language in here about permanent pooling agreements, and we don't have permanent pooling agreements. It was a distinction, it was a word used to distinguish temporary pooling agreements. We think standard is a better term because those pooling agreements are not permanent, and we've actually had to argue with somebody about that in court. So, lesson learned. So there's really kind of housekeeping and just to bring the rule current. I will say that I'm bringing this to you to ask for permission to publish it in the Texas Register for comment. An agency is then, after the comment period, required, if it's going to adopt a rule, to issue an order. And because this is the only time this entity can take action is during a board meeting, I think I'm going to have to come back to ask you to adopt the rule, but at that point we'll have seen whether we had any comments from the published proposed rule in the register. So you'll see this again. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so on the date, what was the date before? You're going to a 30-day
Yes, sir.
response period. What was it before?
It was 14 calendar days.
Oh, wow.
And there were many times at pooling committee meetings where some landman had just called in and staff was, I would say, sort of heroically pulling their application together to get it onto the land board agenda. Now, because we have a longer lead time for briefing to set the agenda and to make sure that materials are in packets, we've now gone to 30 business days, which can be almost 6 weeks, but it allows for the lead time and a little flexibility. And honestly, staff's been requiring that since late last year. And there was a brief week or two just to get industry educated on the new rules, but it's been going smoothly since then. But the rule needs to reflect that, is our thought.
And just a question on.
Yes, sir.
Clearly understand on the pooling standard. I mean, once you reach a pooling agreement, that's it, right? Once you all agree to a pooling agreement.
Well, so applicants who by and large are the same companies over and over, so they know the drill. But when they file an application, it's first reviewed by land office staff, and any issues that there might be about what's being proposed, drilling schedule, primarily, biggest issue, and what acreage is or isn't included in the proposed unit. There's some discussion with the applicant, and it's reviewed internally, and then it's reviewed subsequently by your representatives, and then it's brought to you, and if you approve it on the consent agenda usually, then yes, that's it. The pooling agreement or the production sharing agreement gets signed with the terms that the board has approved.
Okay, so that process, I'm just trying to tie it to what you're changing here.
Only how many days ahead of the school land board meeting where the application will be considered, how many days ahead of that meeting does the application have to get filed, so staff has time to look at it, to reflect the fact that we also do production sharing agreements, which at the time the rule was written evidently was not something that came up because it only addresses pooling agreements, so because we also do production sharing agreements. That's the biggest procedural difference. The rule says that the school land board meets the first and third Tuesday of every month. Well, it doesn't. And so now it says it can meet on the first and or third Tuesday of every month. And then to delete the reference to the AG's office because they're no longer part of the land board. But procedurally, it's mostly the timing and then just allowing for the production sharing agreements.
Thank you.
Sure.
Has there been any negative feedback from applicants? You say we've been doing this for a while.
Yes.
As far as the timing, as far as it taking too long or
Oh, no.
having to submit their applications too far in advance? Or,
I think that at the time that the dial got switched from 14 calendar days to 30 business days, there was a little grumbling, and we probably had one or two people who said, by golly, I got my application in on time according to your rule. But I don't think since that initial hiccup for everyone, I'm not aware that there's been any complaining.
And it's just a part of also giving board members enough time to thoughtfully look through everything and having that in advance enough to be able to do that.
Sure.
As opposed to just having it shoved at you right as you walk in the door type of deal.
Appreciate that.
Ken, one more question.
Yes, sir.
I mean, and help me on just understanding, because in the pooling agreement, you know, you're identifying the state's royalty interest, right? You're identifying the interest there?
It's, yes, I'm pausing because I'm trying to remember whether it's actually in the pooling agreement or whether in the memo that approves pooling where the state's net royalty interest is set out, because it is just a function of math.
Well, I'm just trying to find out, when does the state get into a production sharing agreement?
Oh, it's very similar to pooling. It's just,
Yeah, so what's the difference?
you're looking usually at pooling land where the other tract that's not the PSF minerals doesn't allow for pooling. It's an allocation, something the Railroad Commission has sort of approved anyway for years. Or sometimes you have existing units where you'll have, especially, maybe it'd have to be a horizontal lateral that crosses units, and you've already got pooled units, but you're just apportioning how the production will be shared between the entities. And whether you're at a unit level where that horizontal lateral is crossing, or you're at a lease level, or maybe often in our case, a riverbed that's in between two units and where the school fund owns minerals. It's just a way, it's very similar to pooling, but it isn't pooling. There was quite a lot of discussion, as I know your chief clerk will remember, from when an allocation bill was filed several sessions ago, whether allocation or production sharing and pooling are slightly different or they're the same thing. There's a difference of opinion. I didn't know if you.
Yeah, no, I think that when this rule was initially created, it was in the world of vertical production and pooling, as we historically would think about it, and you would assign the net interest in the acreage and you would go with it. Once we saw kind of the outcropping of all the horizontal development, and really when we saw the push for allocation wells, one of the things that we had pushed for is saying those are similar to us as pooling, and you do not have the authority to pool us until we come to the table and agree to the terms. So the production sharing agreements were our vehicle to say, this is how we're going to deal with allocation wells. We will assign the acreage, the productive acreage in the horizontal footing, and that's how we come up with it. So today, we probably see as many or more production sharing agreements as we do pooling agreements. And I think to your end, all the terms of how much acreage and what's the production, the staff will work that out internally with the operators before it really comes to the pooling board and the agreement. So all of that kind of back and forth is done on the staff level prior to it coming to the board.
Got it. Okay. Thank you, Ken.
You're welcome. Any other questions? So again, the recommendation is for publication of this proposed rule in the Texas Register, and then for a comment period, and then we'll be back after the comment period.
All right.
Got it.
Do I hear a motion?
I'll move.
Second.
All right. Well, motion's made and seconded and carries unanimously for item number 5. Thank you. Item number 6 will be in executive session. The school land board will enter closed session to discuss item number 6 pursuant to Texas Government Code, Section 551.071, for consultation with its attorneys regarding matter involving attorney-client privileged information and legal issues, and Texas Government Code, Section 551.072, to deliberate on certain matters concerning real property. Following the closed section, the board will reconvene in open session to complete the agenda. Visitors should remain in this room as the board will reconvene here following executive session. Thank you. possible action on application by ConocoPhillips to lease Relinquishment Act tract in the town of Montclair, Reeves County, directly from the state pursuant to Texas Natural Resources Code, Section 52.190, and the chair recognizes Ken Mills to present item number 6.
Good morning, Ken Mills again. And yes, staff, as laid out to you in executive session, staff would recommend that the board approve this application for 52-190 lease. The term, the per acre royalty amount, and the quarter royalty are all standard and acceptable to staff as the basic terms of this lease, and staff would recommend that the board approve it. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions, members?
Motion to approve.
Okay.
I'll second.
All right. Motion made, seconded, and carries unanimously for item number 6. That concludes the posted board agenda. Does any board member wish to be recognized to provide any further comments or discussion?
No, ma'am.
All right. There being no further business before the School Land Board, the February 27th, 2024 meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Good discussion.